Credits log, stardate May 2023. December last year, my team and I sought to cover Star Trek's films 5 to 7. Fortunately, the USS Horror Cult Films podcast was sucked into a black hole, and we have emerged 5 months into the future. The universe seems very similar, but all of us are gutted to have missed Avatar 2 at the cinema. Just won't be the same on screen. Still, a little thing like an unexpected hiatus has not dampened our spirits, and so I am glad to once again be joined by my navigator, Jim Lamming.
Take us out.
And my Chief Operations Officer, Mr. Alasdair Yule.
Aye, aye.
Last time we made contact, we had just witnessed the voyage home. Now we continue our mission to boldly go where most podcasts about science fiction have gone before, beginning with Star Trek V, The Final Frontier.
Row, your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Merrily, merrily, merrily.
Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. You know, I don't know about you guys, but one of the problems of writing for a website is it means that some of your reviews are immortalized for the rest of time, including, I would say, an overly glowing one of this. Now, I still see things that I like a lot in this movie, but on repeat viewing, it just didn't really hold up for me. We'll go into some of the good and the bad of this first, but I want to know about your relationships with this movie, because, Alasdair, you've never liked this film at all, have you?
Boo. Yes, boo. I brought along some tomatoes and lettuce to throw.
Yeah, so what's always bothered you about this one?
It's the subpar dialogue. There's things that stand out so obnoxiously that draw your attention to it. I'll start with the relationship between Uhura and Scotty. So they don't.
Yeah.
He doesn't ask her out. They don't start the relationship. It's presented like they've already been in a relationship for a while.
Mm.
And in the previous film, there clearly was none of this. And I'm really looking forward to getting on to the Undiscovered Country, where it's just completely forgotten about.
Yeah, I assume in the series, there was absolutely, the TV series, was there never any hint of
there's
this?
never any hint of that. It's one of the weird peculiarities of this film. I suppose almost despite myself, do I give William, because William Shatner, of course, wrote and directed this and starred in it. He did the whole Tommy Wiseau trifecta. Do I give him credit for giving the supporting cast something to do? No, give them other things to do, not what you chose to give them to do. The fan dance, that relationship. There's a lot wrong with this film. There's moments where they're almost saying what these characters would say, but there's too many moments when they wouldn't. So, like Spock calling them marshmallows, you know he means marshmallows. That's not a mistake Spock would make. It's just not. But Shatner, it's in the script as a setup for another joke that he really wanted to do. From what I know about this film, the previous film, Voyage Home, was a huge success, and part of the elements of that film was this the comedy of that movie, which is really well done. All the cast and crew were fish out of water comedy, and the studio, I believe, mandated that they do the same thing for this film. So all the comedy that was inserted doesn't work. They're trying, but it doesn't work. It's like someone playing the piano, but they hit a wrong note every now and then, and it sort of damages the entire piece, the whole orchestra. And that's kind of what I feel about the dialogue in this film, including the fact that the story's not good. And
I agree with some of that, right? I think the story, the actual basic concept of it, I think is actually quite cool, of reach the centre of the universe and find God. We'll come to some of these specific points in just a moment, but Jim, what about yourself as sort of overall thoughts? Like, have you ever liked this film? Is this like, have you seen it recently, except for this one, or what?
I've only watched this once before. That was back when Sky Movies were playing all of the films prior to Abrams' Star Trek film coming out. I don't hate it. I've not got as much bile for it as Alasdair, but it's nothing remarkable either. It feels very much like a goofy episode, just dragged out a bit. I quite like how it starts. It's quite interesting. You've got that barren planet and this Messiah-like figure appearing out of nowhere to help this desperate guy. And I think it goes well from there for a while. You've already mentioned the exact moment where it starts to fall apart.
Sorry, do you mean it goes well during the opening musical score?
I mean I actually quite enjoyed what I saw up until the ridiculous covert mission to infiltrate Paradise City. I thought it, was pretty well. When you look at the consistency of the previous films, and then you look at the beginning of this one, the first act doesn't feel, out of place next to anything else we've seen prior, other than, as you say, this bizarre, out of nowhere relationship between Scotty and Uhura. But otherwise, I quite enjoyed what I saw up to that point. And going back to Goldsmith's theme, it felt welcome again. It was just had this feeling of, just how grand it should be. It's a Star Trek film. Having that theme play out over the opening credits was just brilliant. But I do wonder if that had anything to do with this coming out the same year Next Generation started to air on the TV. But also, we're probably going to start picking it apart in a minute. But yeah, overall, it's adequate.
Yeah, I mean, let's begin with some positive points, right? Something I liked about this first time, and I absolutely still defend it to this day, there's two standout sequences. The first bit is the whole campfire sequence around Yosemite. I could just watch those three guys just kind of like sort of farting around for ages, right? The bit where it's them sitting around a campfire, we've got these three old friends just really getting to the root of their friendship. They're kind of old married couple vibe that they have here of, all right, they're constantly bickering, but we know that they all love each other. But they also get to something quite profound, which is, none of these guys have families. It's a very lonely post that they have. They're all doing this job that they're always going to be away from people. It's always going to be difficult. And for me, right, I don't think Shatner did this on purpose, but I think the Scotty and Uhura thing actually taps into that a little bit. So it just sort of seems like, okay, these two middle-aged characters that probably had a kind of deal on at some point going, look, if we get to 50 and neither one of us is got a partner, let's just start dating each other. I don't think it's intentional at all, but I think it almost adds something to the sort of the loneliness of the situation. And I quite liked this sort of idea of, them as friends and this sort of becoming like, to them, it's the closest they have to family. So that little bit, really good. When Shore Leave ends, they're all like, oh, fuck. Like, it's that sort of reminder that this is an all-consuming job. And that's something we'll come back to in number 7, that you can't, you typically with these narratives, it's like the woman has to choose between her career and her relationship or whatever. And in this one, it's 3 guys essentially doing that, where they're being like, okay, you can't have it all here. You're not going to be able to do all the things that are normal, but at the same time, you wouldn't want to either because this is your calling here. And I enjoyed that aspect of it. I thought that was really good. We'll come to the other good bit later on, which is the pain sequence. But what did you guys think of it? Because I just really thought the relationship stuff, when I first saw it, that's what I latched onto. I thought, and maybe it's because I haven't seen the series, so I don't really have a kind of familiarity with these scenes of just these 3 guys just shooting the shit, just shooting the breeze, talking about nothing really. And it just sort of felt like that was a really quite authentic sequence. I thought it was very heartfelt and just a lot of fun. And then we'll go back to at the very end of the film when we're doing the row, row, row your boat song. It just, it warmed the heart in a good way.
Mostly, yeah.
I liked it. Funny you mentioned them being like a family, and Spock is clearly the naive child out of the 3 of them. That was a fun moment with them around the campfire trying to sing. Although another thing about the whole sequence from the national park bit was Shatner's stunt double climbing those rocks. Clearly the same physique as
Yeah, I was thinking like Tom Cruise would just climb this thing himself.
Yeah.
But yeah, the family dynamic is great. Putting the original series to the side, I've probably only seen a few episodes of that myself, but this is coming 20 years after that's finished. So they've obviously been through a lot more together since then, including Spock dying and coming back to life and so on. So it is good to see them unwinding in this sort of way. But, it's kind of a double-edged sword because even when they're on shore leave, they've only got each other then as well.
This is going to sound like a really bad comparison, but I just thought of it, right? Something that seeing how old they are, what this reminds me of is some of the recordings Johnny Cash did towards the end of his life. I'm thinking here of like Herter, his version of Father and Son, where the lyrics of these songs are sad when they're sung by younger men like Yusuf Islam, Cat Stevens, and Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails. They become tragic when in the voice of a man in his 70s, 80s, right? And I think with this bit, it acknowledges the character's aging because they can't hide it. They are now 3 old men, and I think the film just kind of leans into that. I think it has that sort of, all right, yeah, they are 3 guys. They have these kind of regrets, things they haven't done in their life. But at the same time, it also says there's still something quite rich that they do have, and that's basically each other.
Yeah. I don't think you could add any more to that, really.
So that was one of the good bits of the movie. Elsa, you got any thoughts of this little campfire thing before we get into some of the less good elements?
Yeah, I mean, I get it's you see the 3 of them just sort of in an environment where we haven't seen them in any of the previous movies, getting to know each other a bit better. There's still like that sort of sparks of annoyance with like Spock getting marshmallows wrong. And I'm going to have to say it, the rocket boots. Spock with rocket boots. What was that all about? I mean, you have to remember, this is a society that have like instantaneous transportation on the transporters. Rocket boots. And of all the characters that puts on rocket boots, I think Spock would be like the least likely to do it.
Yeah, that was maybe a bit goofy. I mean, there's a few bits if they do break character, which we'll come to as we approach the third act.
And it isn't the majority of this part all foreshadowing anyway.
Pretty much, yeah. They're like, all right, we're introducing this because it'll become relevant for escape sequence. We'll have them talk about family because, in a way, this film's about family. Although that being said, Cyborg, right? Two things that irritate me about Cyborg. Number one, him being Spock's brother has almost no dramatic weight whatsoever. Number two, in fact, 3 things that annoy me. Number 2, Spock withholds that he's his brother for absolutely no reason. And that's something where I think they break character, right? Because Spock could be up front. He'd say, by the way, that guy in the image, the guy in the screen, he's my brother. Instead of like teasing it out for some reason. And third thing, right? Cyborg's entire motivation of this just doesn't make any sense to me, right? So he wants to get to the middle of the universe. Cool. Why the hostility and why the threat? Like the thing can fucking teleport, right? Like it doesn't. They don't need to like hold everyone hostage. It struck me as a really forced way of getting drama into this film.
Yeah, there's like other ways to book passage to get to A to B. You don't need to hold the diplomats of 3 superpowers hostage when that's likely to get you killed. Because remember, there's a Federation envoy, the Klingon guy Cord, and the woman with that like scorpion tail hairstyle, Caitlin Dar, that was a Romulan ambassador. So, like, if you know your Star Trek, these are like the 3 superpowers, and kidnapping these 3 individuals is one sure way to get yourself killed. And so it's the most bizarre approach to actually, achieving your ends.
Especially if they say this character can like control over people's minds because you can put them under a spell. You're like, okay, so why don't you just like do that to a cab driver or something like this?
Oh, you're kidding. I mean, it's the film. I made a joke when I was watching the film recently. I made the joke that the guy at the very beginning, whose name is John, but it's spelled J''ONN. So John is digging all these holes in the middle of the desert. And I'm like, each one of these is a plot hole for this film. And the guy in the horse turns up. It's they're trying to do something with the laughing Vulcan, the iconography of that image. But he looks at him, sees him laughing, and he immediately assumes he's a Vulcan. Whereas we know that like Romulans and Vulcans they're indistinguishable, and Romulans have emotions. So he's reached a very strange conclusion. And as we see from Caitlin Dyer later on, there are actually Romulans on this planet. So his natural assumption should have been she's a Romulan, not a Vulcan. So that always struck me as a bit odd and off-key.
Cyborg there? Because he's on the... Presumably, right? Because it's interesting that Cyborg and God, as we find later on in the film, are basically just two guys that crashed their ships. Like, oh, shit. And you really convoluted way to get out of here.
The entity at the end of the film is God, then you could maybe look at Cyborg as a Jesus-type character.
Oh, they definitely lead into that, yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely some iconography or imagery that they're wanting to do. But, I mean, the script needs so much tightening up. I would say throw it out and start again.
With Cyborg, I don't think it's necessarily an issue with the actor. I do think that part of it's about and I don't even necessarily know that it's the script as much as the basic premise of going, well, here's a character that doesn't have any emotions and is also emotionally distant from his brother, so we'll give him a brother. Right? You go, all right, well, if Spock doesn't seem fundamentally changed by the end of the movie.
No.
And that's what the dramatic potential of giving him a brother is. Otherwise, it's just a kind of cheap way to try and make you care about something.
In many ways, Cyborg could just have been anyone. Because, as you'll remember from the scene where they discuss it, they're held in the brig, and they're discussing, well, Spock's parentage, basically. And it was established as canon that Spock was an only child. And they're having to sort of dance around the desired retcon there with, oh no, he was a half-brother. Sarek was married to another Vulcan woman before he married Amanda. And all of this explaining, it's like, it doesn't make it any better. It just makes Cyborg his own character. He was you could have made him Spock's teacher at school or something. It didn't need to be a literal brother. I don't know why he is the brother, though. It's to tie it in thematically with Spock seeing Kirk and McCoy as metaphorical brothers. But the metaphor jars due to the established canon of the franchise.
Yeah, because I guess if a film's saying anything profound here, sort of saying, well, you know, your family are people, you can choose your family to an extent, right? Well, you can't really, but what it's saying is if you treat your friends as being your family, then you can pick your friends. Therefore, by extension, you choose a family that you're going to spend your time with. You know, like if people are saying blood is thicker than water, they're like, yeah, but you know what? Drinking pints with someone, that's thicker than blood, right? And that's essentially your metaphor for the movie. And I agree that there is themes to this. It just feels like none of them are really done much justice. You know, like
they're
in terms
half baked, they're undercooked.
Yeah, like
there's no seasoning.
It's the same thing with the philosophy of Cyborg. Really, his philosophy just isn't explored in any particular depth. Like we got him going, yes, the Vulcans value logic. Well, you know what? I value passion, and you go, why not both? It's a fallacy for false dichotomy, mate, right? Like, it just felt too simple. And then we never really get to know any of his followers. They just kind of stand there in the background, and they're basically there as social proof for Cyborg. You know, they're there to sort of say, all right,
that's a good way of putting it.
This guy's smart because we follow him, but we don't know that they're smart. You know, we don't know anything about them except the Cyborg guy can seemingly influence people at will. And Cyborg doesn't have any real arc in this. He learns he's wrong about God and goes like, I'm going to stop all this magic nonsense. And then proceeds to try and use his magic nonsense on God. Like,
I actually like that bit because we see several times when he says, "Your pain runs deep. Share it with me." By the way, guys, I'm sharing my pain with you right now. And that pain is Star Trek V. I actually liked that he found out that he'd been conned, and instead of going into denial, he acted on it. And what I liked about that's actually very Vulcan, that ability to move on quite quickly.
I wish he
that
just not
thing and
used his
get trapped.
catchphrase, though. Like, his catchphrase kind of cheapened.
But then it says, your pain, like this entity, we're skipping to the third act here, and this god thing trapped on that planet, it's clearly some sort of very powerful entity that's been in prison. We know next to nothing about this creature, other than, and by the way, this thing has no social skills. You came here, how did you get through the barrier? A ship? Bring it closer. Can it get me through the barrier? Like, he's just zeroing in. There's no, how's it going? Nice to see you. How's your mum? He's going and he's zeroing in immediately on what he wants. And with Cyborg saying to this creature, your pain runs deep. Like, I buy that this thing is in pain because it's been in prison for maybe a millennia, an eon, you don't know. It's been there a long time. There's no social skills at all.
Yeah, like, I agree with you that was maybe a smart move to sort of humanize this entity. But yeah, I think it was more just the using the wording to match the thing that he said he wouldn't do any longer. That's the thing that got to me. But I think as far as this God thing goes, one of the weak points of the movie overall is that Kirk doesn't really achieve much because Cyborg defeats this god, and then the Klingons aren't defeated by Kirk either. Instead, the Klingons are like, all right, shit, the Klingons are going to start coming after us. Can you get us out of this? And then they turn around and go, by the way, Mr. Klingon, will you, will you just save us? And he goes, I'll try. That's strategies, right? So, like, the third act sort of has two anticlimaxes. I did think that the image they used of God was quite endearing. How it just looked like a big sort of like cartoon god with a big beard and stuff like
Beardy
that.
bloke.
Yeah.
I would like to compare it to. I mean, we've seen the Time Bandits here, haven't we? The big face that's chasing the main cast down the hallway, like bring back what you stole. That sort of thing. That I get flashbacks to the Time Bandits with the actor that played God in this film. It's actually it really works. The effects that they're applying to this is one of the things I do like about the film. With this entity, the sound effects, the way they warp the voice to make it sound, I don't know, cosmic and holy, and this big entity. They got the voice and the actor for it. They got that right. Although I will point out that obviously he just immediately starts shooting people from his eyeballs once they start asking the most rudimentary of questions. And then the big rock finger dome that comes around and falls down. Kirk's running away. God's following him at a very leisurely pace. Klingon bird of prey appears, shoots God in the face twice for good measure, and then the gun then trains on Kirk. They beat Kirk up, and they do the thing of it's needs Captain Kla, the Klingon, and as I put him in his place as the General Cord, and we've got a hell of a gunner. The gunner turns out to be Spock. My question to you, Spock, is why did you turn the gun on your own superior officer?
Yeah, good question.
Like, it's very dramatic for an audience that you don't know we're there. This is the difference between representational acting and presentative acting.
Something that irritated me about that sequence, you're absolutely right that God just folds with the slightest pressure. But the question about what a God would want with a starship, what does God need with a starship? Yeah,
never gets answered.
It should have been Spock asking it. Like it should be like the logical guy there who asks it. Instead, we have to go for reality where the smart guy in the crew is believing in this, and then no, because Kirk's even smarter than Spock. He's the one who goes, "Hold on, bullshit," and then goes from there.
That entity immediately tips its hand, as I said, it wants to bring that starship closer. And I say, "You want a starship? What are the limitations on your powers exactly?"
Well, give it a compliment of this. We've actually got a lot more planet hopping in this film than we do other films up until this point.
Earth, Nimbus 3, and the God Planet. By my count, that's 3 by my count.
We see lots of planets. I thought that was cool, and the God planet itself looks quite nice. It doesn't look as nice as the planets we're going to see in the next couple of films, but at the same time, it was pretty reasonably characterized. The music was quite beautiful as well as they're walking around on these hills. And
I'm giving this film more compliments than I normally would, but I did quite enjoy when they're on the God planet. They've applied, I think, like a purple colored filter to it to make this planet's alien-esque, and purple's often that sort of unsettling color that you would apply to a strange environment. But despite that, they filmed it in a very beautiful location. I'd say this is in the deserts of Nevada somewhere, that was the shooting location for this. But that part of the film worked.
yeah, I think there's some good bits. And in fact, in terms of the locations, we also have. I thought the small bar was quite interesting. Where we have that cat woman.
3 boobs. We've got to say it. She had 3 boobs.
Yeah,
It's Total Recall. The cat woman had 3 boobs.
Who did it first, though, Shatner or Verhoeven? Because Total Recall wasn't released until a year after this.
Oh, really? No way.
I could be wrong on this, but I reckon Shatner nicked the script for Total Recall, and that was in there.
Yeah, that bar was basically
Star Wars.
The last 10 years of sci-fi films preceding this, like probably just every costume nicked from those wardrobe departments. And probably the worst thing about it was the pool table.
We mentioned the fan dance earlier. Oh yeah, fuck, I wasn't. we mentioned the fan dance earlier on, right? Now the fan dance reminded me of Snakes on the Plane, where we've got this line where the guy goes, "Don't you think I've exhausted every other option?" The idea they go, all right, well, we need to get the attention of these guys. What's our only option? Strip off.
And they get them. And I will want to point out here that William Shatner in real life owns a ranch. He loves horses. He loves horse riding. And in this, and as we'll get to in Generations, horses turn up wherever Shatner's involved. So the whole point of them landing at that point was to get, we have Earth horses on this planet. Although it was fun to see Spock neck pinch one of them.
Oh yes, that was a nice effect. That was very cool.
I mean, they were really banking on how alluring Uhura was at that point as well. I mean, it's just a good job that they were all up for it.
Like all of them, like there's 7 men and they all fled for this fan dance. I mean, it's not like they've just, because I mean, the Nimbus City, that palace that they raided, they only raided it, a day or 2 before? These idiots should be on high alert. Like, Cyborg can manipulate these guys only to a point. As soon as you get the fan dance out, they're like, oh no, all that Cyborg nonsense, forget that.
It's like something out of Looney Tunes, isn't it? I don't know, Roadrunner or whatever. They'd like get a mannequin and put lipstick on it or something to distract the bad guy. Make the wolf like float over to it or whatever. It's just in the same vein as that.
I think at some point we'll also have to actually talk about Captain Kla and his magnificent non-impact on the plot. In every conceivable way.
There's a lot of that, though. It's quite a cluttered script in places, but things that don't really add up to much. Like the entire Klingon threat doesn't really add anything to it. Like we've got quite a nice tense sequence where although it looks really, really bad, you know, when we've got the bird of prey coming, the Enterprise just goes and then leaves. But like it adds a bit of sort of peril to the whole thing, but it doesn't. But it isn't really there for any reason. Like the way they go, okay, we'll go teleport to the center of the universe, and the Klingons just do it as well. Like I don't know. It wasn't a very personalized conflict. It just felt like there is yet another antagonist.
Yeah, it's like in Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, Planet Exegol is you can't get there. It's difficult to get there. But whenever anyone tries to get there, they always succeed every single time. It's this exact same thing. Like we can't cross the Great Barrier. It's risky and dangerous. The Enterprise does it easy. I fully buy that the bird of prey had no problems whatsoever in the Great Barrier.
Yeah.
This was better than that Star Wars film, though. It's got to be said. At least this one, just wasn't some kid playing with their toys.
Star Trek: The Rise of Cyborg.
That's a sequel everyone wants. I think he needs his own prequel, guys. We really got to thrash out this philosophy. I want to see him moving around the world like an L. Ron Hubbard figure.
I think they've actually teased that in Strange New Worlds.
Oh, a Cyborg prequel. Oh, fuck, I better start watching this.
I'm pretty sure it mentioned Spock's brother in
I know what you mean. It's in. It was teased in season 1 of Star Trek: Strange New Worlds. Strange New Worlds is covering the era before Kirk was in command of the Enterprises with Captain Pike. But it was established in the pilot episode way back in the 60s that Spock was the first officer on that ship before Kirk took command. So Spock's in the show. Do you know, Final Frontier is one of these sort of embarrassments in the franchise that every other efforts have been made in the franchise to avoid ever referencing this episode, this movie, until now.
But funny you should say that. Are they doing the same thing with the motion picture in this film due to the fact that the Klingons shoot the Voyager satellite?
Do you know, I mean, I don't believe, because Voyager 6 became V'Ger, destroyed 3 Klingon battleships. The Klingons, I mean, this might even work as a fan theory. The Klingons are like, can't let any more of these human satellites get out there. Let's go in and mop them all up. That would actually explain what Captain Kla is doing with that in Voyager 2, Voyager 1. I forget which satellite it was.
I just figured they'd forgotten that they'd already made a film with that in.
Yeah, they did. So I want to talk about the special effects here. Alasdair, you told me before that there's a reason the special effects were so pants in this film, isn't there?
Yeah, they didn't get the same crew that they had the previous films. It was, I think in Hollywood it got referred to as the B team. So obviously the information I'm going on is what I've found out on IMDb and Wikipedia, but guys that they had before this were actually working on Ghostbusters at the time. So they were working with, they just had a different team that, but they didn't have any of the original stuff. They had to build a lot of these special effects from scratch. And the nature of Star Trek necessitates a high degree of proficiency in your special effects. And I just don't think they were quite up to it. I mean, there's some scenes where, some of it's, no, there's no denying it. It's bad. Do you remember when the bird of prey shoots the satellite, and when the satellite spins through space, they somehow manage to make a spinning satellite look like stop motion. How do you do that? Just hold up an actual model satellite of the Voyager space probe and turn it to the camera.
The bit where they went through the barrier looked okay. But that's maybe because my main basis of comparison was in the first one where we're passing through the wormhole.
I thought it looked like the opening to the Never-Ending Story.
I've never seen Never-Ending Story, by the way, so that'll have to be another future franchise that we do.
Yeah. I always find those sort of effects endearing. I guess it just reminds me of a lot of the sci-fi films I watched while I was growing up. It was very Flash Gordon, like the way all the clouds
that's another one.
And so on. You know what? I'd take that
Gordon's
any day
alive
over a green screen. I've got to tell you, I would like CGI these days. As impressive as it is, I get more out of practical effects. It's just something about it. But
I know what you mean.
The thing for me that kind of was off is the scale of everything. When they're trying to land the shuttle in the Enterprise cargo hold, the shuttle looks about half the size of the bloody Enterprise, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It looks like they've got trying to get it in the boot of a Mini.
Trying to get a canoe into a matchbox.
Yeah, because like some of it, you're right. If we've got the B team, there are obviously backstage problems, but some of it's just downright careless. Like the prison break sequence was particularly bad. Where we see it's a paper wall, But the problem is the wall doesn't cave in the same shot. The wall caves in, and then we see another shot where he's leaning through the paper wall. And you're like, okay, at that point, you could just put bricks. And you can put whatever we're making walls
Yeah.
from the future. Or like when they've got the bit where they're using the boots, and then they go past level 52 twice. Like, just things like that shouldn't really happen here because it's still it's not an action film as such, but it's still sort of as an adventure thing. It's still driven by set pieces, and I just think the set pieces had a sort of that'll do sort of quality about them.
Yeah. Just to add as well to that, the second rocket boot sequence where they're going up the elevator shaft in the middle of the Enterprise. A number of mistakes are done here. So they start out at, like, they're climbing up, and then you see a deck 8, climb up a bit further, deck 13, so on and so forth. The decks of the Enterprise, from the top down, like the bridge is deck 1, below that's deck 2. So they got that the wrong way around. And there's also, they fly up. Okay, fun fact, you see deck 52 twice inexplicably, but they go up to like deck 78. But the Enterprise only has 30 decks, or maybe it's 20 decks. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but it's not 78.
Yeah, the thing is, you go, if you know that, then Shatner should know this.
Yeah, they
Like,
should
he
have
was
known that.
funny thing.
But I think from the angle that they're shooting it, like the higher up they're going, they wanted a bigger number for dramatic effect. But I think this is one of those things in certain drama pieces that in order to construct something that is dramatic in the moment, they're forgetting what the rules are, what the actual setup and the canon is. And you create that, oh, hang on a minute, that ain't quite right.
Now, I want to say something that I think worked in this movie. Again, same defending this one. The big dramatic highlight of this, I would say, is the pain sequence, where Cyborg is making them all confront their pain. It's the bit with the best acting by Shatner for a start, when he's like, I need my pain, he's saying. And I don't want my pain taken away. I need my pain. And I think little bits like that, where we get a sort of a vulnerability to the characters, that was good because by this point, we already have the benefit of the doubt that they can solve whatever situation we're thrown into here, because we've seen them do this in 4 films and we've seen them do this in a TV series. And I thought, okay, well, you're not going to give them a situation that bamboozles them, but what you can do is give them a situation that puts them under emotional stress. And I think that worked. I think the sequence of Bones euthanizing his dad, firstly, the certain kind of balls required to do that for an American movie, especially during the Reagan era. But it also told us something about Bones fundamentally as a character, something that, although it wasn't hinted at in the series, I don't believe, it still goes, that makes sense about him, you know? And that I thought was a really good sequence. The whole mind meld thing, which seemed to be shared, like the kind of synchronized hypnosis in Exorcist Part 2, was my immediate thought. That looked a bit daft, although the effects that they used there, or the staging they used, was very good. Like, I really liked where Bones sees his dad, and then, that part of the room is now turned into a hospital bed. We have like a cityscape out the window. That looked amazing.
It was pretty good. Obviously, I guess it gives us an insight into what Cyborg's showing everyone when he confronts them and turns them to his side.
It totally made sense that each character could see that. Like, it made sense that even Bones could see it. It just didn't really make sense that Kirk could also see it.
Yeah, that's...
They've all been drinking the Kool-Aid.
In a film full of inconsistencies, it's just yet another one, isn't it? But, because at first it did seem like it was just a personal thing, and then everyone's there. But it's. I like the way that the big three were quite resilient towards it. Like this is how they've lived their lives. So what does it matter now if they if they still hang on to that?
I found. We know about. Through the series, you learn that Spock and his father didn't always see eye to eye. And that, I mean, the film shares no new information there, but the one that it did, that was introduced and was quite sort of stark, was McCoy and his father. I think that scene's probably the best bit of the whole film. That he's letting his father pass with dignity, only to discover a short time later that a cure was found and he could have saved his father. And how that has left him, that must have bugged his happiness. Absolutely, that's left him unsettled and tortured and riddled with guilt, and that sort of what if. That, I think that was the best of Cyborg's show me your pain moments.
Any other big points we want to bring in for this one?
There was a lot of foreshadowing about Kirk dying alone. He brings it up at the beginning. Like, they're all having a great time, and then he brings that up. It's like, oh, all right then, Captain Buzzkill. And then we get a couple of moments where potentially that's going to happen, where he tries to, be the one-man army, the hero of the hour. And when it comes to that moment, it's basically just him running away from a big face for a minute, and which then gets shot by the Klingons. So it just feels all that build-up. They could have at least given us like Kirk getting injured or genuinely being in mortal peril, other than being pursued by a big face with laser eyes. But it just felt like it came to nothing, and that was a bit disappointing, really.
Yeah, because we get a nice payoff when he goes, "I thought I was going to die," and then he's told, "You were never alone." And that was quite nice. But I agree that it almost seems to be building up that Kirk could die in this film. And then there's never really any tension about that.
No, there is nothing there. That entire sequence, just as you've already mentioned, there's no peril in it whatsoever. It's just everything gets conveniently solved. We have that little chase moment, but otherwise it's just done.
I think there's a lot of manufactured tension in this film because the main point and villain, I suppose, of this film is God. There's so many different ways Cyborg could get to that planet, but he has to hijack a ship as a way of manufacturing tension until we get to the third act, because we can't have nothing happen for acts 1 and 2. And there would be no inciting incident even. You could never have an inciting incident in Act 3, for instance. I've just remembered one thing I do want to comment on, actually, in terms of, I know I've ragged on the comedy and said a lot of it didn't work in this film, but there is one that I do quite like. It's when Kirk and Spock are together on the Klingon bridge. When Kirk is about to hug Spock, but Spock says, "Please, Captain, not in front of the Klingons." I liked that one. I did like that one.
I think as far as the comedy goes, some of it's coming from the state of the Enterprise.
I don't like that.
Yeah, I think the thing is, the state of the Enterprise, to me, it worked thematically. The Enterprise seemed to be a bit past its best. I don't know if it's necessarily funny as a source of humor, but it was consistent with what all of these films, with the exception of number 4, have been about, which is this sort of ongoing midlife crisis of Captain Kirk as he kind of goes from from being a young man into a young man. It comes from being a middle-aged man into being an old man. And that's the kind of trajectory, I guess, we're seeing him on here.
I would disagree. I think we could see in the first film, Kirk, prioritized himself and his ego, got command of the Enterprise back, but he wasn't totally familiar with the ship operations. In the second film, the drama comes from the fact that, you've just had, Khan's just unloaded phasers and torpedoes into you. So that's damaged the ship. It didn't leave space dock damaged. It was working fine until it got shot at. And in the third film, he hijacks it. It's not been repaired. So everything is a bit wonky there. And then he suicided the ship over the Genesis planet. I think that the Enterprise A, as it is just brand spanking new and off the factory floor, should have been running fine. There's no reason for this one to have any issues with it other than manufactured drama and manufactured sitcom moments that don't belong in a Star Trek film.
I mean, maybe it's just an avenue they could have gone down a bit better. To me, it seemed intentional of ramshackle ship, and we're acknowledging the characters' age again. But I suppose actually there's Kirk's had a number of different arcs for where he seems to have resolved this. Like in number 2, where he's at the end of the film, he's going, "I've got a new lease of life. I've got a new reason to live and stuff like this," because he's got his son. And of course, his son's taken away from him in part 3, and then he's back to kind of again this middle-aged malaise. And then it's part 4 is this sort of mammal out of water one, where the film ends up being a lot more kind of cheerful. I think something you're completely right about with the humor is the humor makes this quite tonally really inconsistent and just a bit awkward, actually, where there's a lot of intentional gags, but they're kind of undermined by the seriousness of the themes or whatever statement it's trying to make about religion. It just kind of dances around, and I don't know, it's not funny enough to be doing this.
The jokes themselves, they don't snap together. Like, we have to contort the story to make the joke work.
I think that same can be said about the condition of the ship as well.
Yeah.
Because a lot of what happens is because the ship isn't working as it should do. Like the shuttlecraft sequence and so on. That's it's just too many coincidental things just to add an extra bit of action or drama to it,
Yeah, agreed.
So let's go on to ratings for this one. So personally, I approve of the heart of the film. I approve of the relationships, the friendship. That works, but the actual basic plot mechanics really don't, which is this trip into the center of the universe, the relevance of which we only find out very late in the film, this underwhelming confrontation with God, and then this underwhelming ending where it's just, all right, well, by the way, all the Cyborg stuff from earlier ceases to kind of matter because Cyborg as a threat he's not really got that motivation to kill them from the beginning, and his philosophy isn't explored enough. So it's a series of good ideas that aren't really done justice. But yeah, I still can't get myself to dislike it because it does have these 3 old friends just kind of spending their shore leave together, and I want to see that again. I thought that was a lot of fun. It was very rewarding. So I can't give this a complete negative score. I think I'm going to go with. Last time I gave it 3, I'm probably going to go with a 2.5.
Okay. There's the very last shot. There's the 3 of them sat around a campfire again, singing "Row, row, row your boat." But Dr. McCoy, although you can hear him singing, is just sat there with an exasperated look on his face, and that probably translates to the audience as well. that was it. Oh, okay. But again, like David said, for all the negative about it, there's still stuff to like. So I think I'm gonna be on the fence with this one and go with a 3.
And Alasdair, what do you reckon?
1.5. I'd say it'd be a 1, but not in front of the Klingons. I mean, there's little bits of this film that I do actually quite like, but as the overall experience on a cost to benefit ratio, it's more cost than benefit. I mean, the ideal, if you're going to have a Trek night in, you watch 2, 3, 4, skip this one and jump on to 6, which I hope we're heading towards next.
There was probably a reason why this was dead last in the listings of Star Trek on Paramount Plus. Right at the end of the list.
I wonder, because they call it the Final Frontier, now obviously within the context of the show, the Final Frontier means some things. We're not using it to mean space. At the same time, it also feels as if it's meant to be like an indication this might be the last outing for the crew. Now, thankfully, it's not, because as we're about to discover in just a few seconds, they go to the undiscovered country. But this film was a big box office flop. Now, I think part of that may have been because it was released around Thanksgiving, which is not a time to be releasing a movie unless your movie happens to be amazing, which this one was not. But Star Trek returned, and it returned with the sixth outing, the Undiscovered Country.
The Klingon Empire has 50 years of life left to it.
To offer Klingons a safe haven within Federation space is suicide.
They're animals. Jim, they are dying. You, Captain Kirk, are to be our first olive branch. Me?
The Undiscovered Country. So after the Shatner to bed with the last one, we have what's a bit of a series return to form here. We've got political assassination going on. We have this attempt at brokering peace, a clear parallel for the Cold War being made during the Cold War. It's immediately quite interesting. It's got a much darker tone as well than number 5. It just feels like a much more mature outing. Jim, to go and do for you first, what did you make of this one, and what has been your relationship with this film so far?
This has always been a weird one for me because it's always held in such high regard, but is that just because it's coming off the back of 5? That's not to say it's not a good film. It's, we've got the director back from The Wrath of Khan, which is, widely regarded as the best of the Star Trek films. And you can see that in the performances as well, because I've got to say, I don't think any of the main cast have been better than they have in this film. Everyone seems to actually care in this one. I just got more of a sense, even from Shatner, who just does his own thing all the fucking time anyway. I got more of a sense that they actually cared what was going on in this film than even Wrath of Khan, which, as I say, the best one. I got more of a sense from this that everyone cared about this film. They wanted it to be the best one. It's probably because it's the last one as well. They're all due for retirement. This is their last mission. They're, 3 months away from retiring. And there was just something so good about everyone in this film. I like how it started. We've got Sulu, the captain of his own ship. So, the crew have gone on to bigger and better things. But, well, I guess Starfleet isn't the Federation. But I would have expected them to be a little more impartial when it comes to this Klingon peace treaty they're trying to stick together. They've got the big meeting with the Enterprise crew about picking up the ambassador. And, everyone seems to be of the opinion, well, that, why?
That wasn't the ambassador, that was the Chancellor. That was the head of the Klingon state. Yeah,
played by David Warner.
Yeah, brilliantly.
In his second appearance in...
Yeah, he was in Star Trek 5.
Is that the Jeffrey Combs of the Star Trek movies?
Most likely.
But yeah, the opening, the establishing what's going on, it was all very good, and maybe plods on a little bit too much before we actually get to the Klingons meeting with the Enterprise, having that dinner where they're all discussing Shakespeare and their own political opinions around the table, which drives tensions. I mean, some of it's a bit friendly. Bones being surprisingly diplomatic and seeing things from both sides in that one. He's normally the curmudgeon, set in his ways. But
he's usually your racist uncle.
Yeah. But I was surprised by his input in that whole thing. And then we get to the spies, the double agents, the political espionage, assassination, which was a good sequence with the Klingon ship being fired upon by the Enterprise, even though it wasn't firing. That was quite a good sequence. And then we get the whole zero gravity scene where the Klingons are getting shot by these two mysterious Enterprise crew members. You've got the blood floating everywhere, which was pretty good for its day, I suppose.
I suppose for its day, yeah. It looks a bit naff now, but fair play.
And considering this is the very early 90s.
It looks better than the CGI blood used in the finale of Blade.
Yeah, I mean, there are some good special effects in this. I thought the ships looked really good for a start.
Yeah, they did.
from an actual filmmaking point of view, this is probably the best film in the whole series. The best performances, the best direction, the best special effects. It's probably one of the best looking films out of the whole lot as well. And by comparison with 5, it's leagues ahead of that as well. But there's just something that just drags it down a bit for me. I think it's possibly the whole Klingon trial and everything. They shoehorn in Worf because everyone loves the Next Generation now.
The trial was pretty good. It's quite intimidating. It's quite.
Yeah, I did like the cyberpunk warlock with his orb of justice.
That's a great way of putting it. Orb of justice.
But I just felt the whole penal colony thing just dragged out. Just was there to drag out the running time a little bit.
Well, I was going to compare this to there's so much Cold War stuff here going on. The fact that I think the interior design of the Klingon battleship is very much meant to look like a submarine, and not as colourful and open and as free as that's what you're seeing on the Enterprise. That Romulan ale is illegal in the Federation. Yeah. That's your Cuban cigars right there. And the Rura Pente, the whole prison sequence, that's a massive stand-in for a Soviet gulag.
That was far too. That was really on the nose, was it?
With that amount of snow.
Yeah, and the way the prison guards spoke as well.
Yeah, it was. It's one of those things that if you don't know to look for it, you won't see it. But it is quite obvious in this film that this is all Cold War. There's even quotes from when General Chang says at the trial, "Don't wait for the translation. Answer me now." There's little moments like that. They're drawing inspiration from a lot of different areas, and I actually quite liked the thing about the Rura Pente gulag sequence is it kind of has to be there because they're not going to execute them in the interests of peace between the Federation and the Klingon Empire. But they put them to Rura Pente as a way for the characters to escape. But it also shows what life is like if you're a prisoner in the Klingon Empire. And it also, I noticed on this viewing, all the prisoners on Rura Pente, very few of them are actually Klingon. There's a lot of other alien races in there. And I was wondering if that was a take on how in the Soviet Union, if you were one of the ethnic minorities, you were far more likely to get, I would say, gulagged than someone who was ethnically Russian. Because you saw everyone of all different shapes and sizes inside that prison, but very few Klingons were there.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I mean, I think I'm inclined to agree with yourself actually as well about the importance of that whole bit. I mean, maybe the whole escape plan thing is a bit of a convoluted way of just saying, well, we're going to let you escape to kill you, as opposed to we'll just kill you and then cover it up. But at the same time,
because he does state that if we kill one, that's fine, but two would be suspicious. But if you were both killed whilst trying to escape, the whole thing was engineered to, because the Klingons sentenced them to imprisonment on Rura Pente, but they were actually going to be killed by the Klingons.
Yeah, but it struck me as they could sentence them and then just take him into the field. But I think something that it was also good for was it freed up their, aside from allowing us to see Bones and Kirk working together, which typically be Kirk and Spock in these. I liked that also meant the rest of the crew had their time to shine as well. So you go, okay, well, as that happens, Spock's solving a mystery.
You get Chekhov finding the Klingon blood in the transporter pad.
Yeah, we've got Scotty finds the missing uniforms.
Yeah, he does. And he also ascertains that on the computer log it says we fired 2. But he went and visually accounted for every single torpedo when they were fully locked. They're fully stocked, I should say.
While the sequence doesn't quite work with Uhura. She uses her understanding of the Klingon language as well to help.
Yeah, and they're all sat there flicking through the
Yeah.
books, yeah.
Apparently, the actress hated that scene because she wanted Uhura to have basically been fluent in Klingon, and I can see where she comes from.
Oh, yeah.
You see, this joke, I'll say this one doesn't work in the way most of the jokes in 5 don't work, in that we're having to upset the Uhura character to make the joke. Whereas she should have known how to speak Klingon. I mean, if it's your number one enemy is the Klingon Empire, you have on each one of your starships someone that speaks Klingon should you run into one of their ships. I mean, that's just a given. So this I don't quite buy. It's a shame because the joke they're going for, I mean, it's not that bad. I mean, when the Klingons themselves make a bad joke and laugh at their own joke. It's just the Klingons were, how they're written, like as a notes on how you write Klingons was samurai Viking, and the boozy Viking element of them came across in that sequence.
I suppose it's maybe a cheap way of sort of integrating a bit of tension around here, like, because if we know that she knows Klingon, then she can do that without any sweat. And then you go, all right, well, we could have mined that a bit further. I mean, although it could have been if they were speaking a very specific dialect or something like that, maybe that could have been a way of doing that whilst retaining the dignity of the character, whilst also putting them in a situation of danger.
I'd have had the Klingons say, don't get any bugs or something. Have the Klingons make their stupid joke. Uhura does not find it funny, but she's prompted to still laugh at it. If that's how I would redo that scene, I think.
Something else that I wasn't really a fan of in this film, and I'll get to all my compliments very soon, so I've got many. I thought the mystery was a little bit too Scooby-Doo, where we know that it's Christopher Plummer's character because he's like, well, I suppose the twist of this is Kim Cattrall's character also being in this. We know it's Christopher Plummer's character because he's because we know he's been like the other named character. Right. So that's one of those sort of surprises that I don't imagine surprised anyone. And I kind of wish the mystery had just had a little bit more depth to it, because we have 2 parallel plots. We have Kirk and Bones in jail. We have the investigation of the ship. And it's not clear how long either of them lasts. It's the Empire Strikes Back thing, does Luke do all his training in an afternoon, or is the Millennium Falcon being chased for a period of weeks, right? And neither one of those interpretations really makes sense. Because the film's good enough, then you just go, okay, well, it doesn't really matter. And in this one, I just sort of thought, if the mystery had been a little bit more in depth, then the pacing issue wouldn't have been a problem. But it just sort of felt a bit like, well, that was kind of obvious. He's a guy who I suspected at the very beginning. Could we have put in like a couple of kind of obvious red herrings here? Like Poirot, going, oh, here's the Baron or something, right?
I see where you're coming from. But I think the mystery elements, it's not the story. It's an aspect to the story in a way that, like, for instance, Scream, who is Ghostface? Like, the mystery is not as important to this story as it is to a Scream film or a Poirot story. It's still an aspect to it, but like in terms of the rankings of the ingredients of this story, I wouldn't put the mystery as quite as high. So it doesn't bother me that it's blindingly obvious who did it. What I do like is that the character surrounding it. So Spock's got his Padawan. I'm going to completely mess up my Star Trek and Star Wars here, but Savik's his Padawan. He's been teaching her, he's mentoring her, and he's disappointed in her for believing this nonsense from the racism in certain members of the Federation and the Klingons. And she got the wrong impression from Kirk's personal log that she was eavesdropping in on the start. So the reveal that it's her, like, it's obvious, but I'm not bothered that it's obvious because that character element. And when Spock does something that there's a bit of emotion behind, I kind of like seeing that. She's pointing the phaser at his chest and he slaps it out of her hand and he's showing that bit of emotion there. I like that.
Yeah, that was a bit of a ooh moment, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, a bit of and it's quite a spooky moment when like Spock's mind melding with Valaris to find out if she knows who the other conspirators are. And when he's doing that, he tries to find out where the new location for the next treaty is being held. She does a few really quite cringy screams, and then says she doesn't know.
I've noticed you've mentioned Savick a couple of times by accident.
My mistake, it's Valaris.
But it's an easy one to make because other than the whole shady betrayal, there's very little to differentiate those two characters.
Well, I mean, the reason I have Savick in mind, I was going to bring it up, is the fact that the character of Valaris was initially supposed to be Savick.
Right.
And Nicholas Meyer was talked out of it because he said that's a fan favorite. People won't want to see her turn against the other characters. So they created a brand new character who would turn against him. But apparently, like the actor that plays Admiral Cartwright, you last saw him in Star Trek 4. I think I've got it right in that the actor was actually pissed off about being a traitor. So it's there. I think one of the issues with Star Trek 6 is that people involved in the making of the film had issues with it. Like Michelle Nichols, who plays Uhura, like people on the, who worked on the film but liked the Savick character. Okay, fine, Valaris is a suitable stand-in for that, but functionally, the character is Savick, who's also fulfilling the role of Spock's Padawan, but because it's a different person, quote unquote, she can be a traitor.
Something I want to touch upon here is a very good point. We mentioned earlier the dinner sequence. I thought the dinner sequence was very tense. Like I quite liked that it interrogated the Federation, some of this sort of human exceptionalism. That what we have here is two different groups that have, or in the movie, quite reasonable chips on their shoulder here, right? They're like, well, we don't trust the Klingons because of all that's come before. The Klingons are also kind of dealing with this legacy of conflict as well. They're like, do we really want to integrate with these guys? And I enjoyed as well that with Kirk, he has to kind of overcome his own sort of prejudice. Now, his prejudice in this is contextualized. We know that the Klingons are the baddies. We've got a reminder that they killed his kid. So it's not that we're not looking at him in the same way that maybe Bones is a bit of a sort of space racist, right? With regards to Kirk, it's a very clear emotional journey that he's been on with the Klingons. I think, Alasdair, you've made a comparison with them and the Daleks, as being the, they're a personal baddie for him. But
for the Doctor, obviously in Doctor Who, the Daleks are the ones that, those stories are great because they just bring out the worst in the Doctor. And they really challenge him in ways that other villains don't. And I think in Star Trek, like Kirk was running that. Like there's a lot of bloodthirsty Klingons that want to get in their own ship and go make a name for themselves. And Kirk's obviously run into several of these in the TV series and in the movie. So it's accumulated over a lot of time. I mean, it's Kirk doesn't speak about the Klingons in the same way that McCoy speaks about Spock's being a green-blooded hobgoblin. I mean, I don't think, I know what they're trying to do with the McCoy character, but I don't think it's actually aged that well.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a bit of banter in there with McCoy.
Let's cancel McCoy.
Yeah, with McCoy, I think there's a level of banter here, but with with Kirk, there's outright hatred here.
Yes,
and it's something that I like. He has to overcome that because I like I was saying, I guess, about the last one. We're going, okay, so it's difficult to put the crew into a situation where we don't think they can solve it. What you can do is put them in a situation where they're being emotionally tested. In this case, with Kirk, he has to overcome this very firmly rooted dislike for the Klingons. And that, I guess, if you're doing this at a time of the Cold War, where, here's Kirk, your kind of all-American hero here, and then, here's the baddies who are ostensibly standing in for the Russians, then I quite liked that they were taking quite a mature approach towards the conflict here. We see some sort of arc going on here, with regards to like how the Klingons are integrating here, how we're seeing them deal with the Federation. And also with how the Federation and also by extension the crew learn to deal with them as well. I think that's something. It's for the era it came out as well. It deals with the Cold War in a way that, like, it's taking Rocky IV as the obvious, like, sort of big blockbuster approach to do the Cold War in an established franchise, or some of the Bond ones as well, right? They were a bit more black and white with the way that they were handling it, particularly Rocky IV, where essentially Rocky says, "Okay, the communists need to change." And in this instance, the American hero also needs to change. And I thought that was a really interesting considering the context.
I want to comment on Spock, and he's very much the instigator of a lot of what happens in this. And because, as you say, he vouches for Kirk to be the one to meet the Klingon envoy. And Kirk obviously does not want to be the one to do this. But I think this is Spock seeing the best in Kirk and seeing that he could become a better person if he overcomes these grudges. I just want to comment quickly, because I don't think we've mentioned it yet, but the moon exploding at the beginning of the film, which was Praxis, which was Klingons mining dilithium for their warp drives, and there was a lack of overmining, a lack of safety caused it. Direct analogy to Chernobyl right there.
Yeah, at that point, I guess, for like, well, we're reluctantly having to reach out.
But
Klingons didn't want this either.
I mean, Kirk says, there's a line of Kirk dialogue where he says it never occurred to him to take Gorkon at his word. It's Chancellor Gorkon, the head of the state, the Klingon Empire, and it might be likely that Gorkon had always wanted peace with the Federation, but was never able to get it past his, I don't know what the Klingon version of a cabinet or council is, but the high command on the Klingon Empire might have wanted to continue hostilities. But obviously, with the loss of their Chernobyl, they couldn't afford it anymore. And this is Gorkon's chance to get the peace that he wants. Because my interpretation of this is that he is earnest in his desire for peace.
Well, the Klingons are notoriously stubborn bastards and are all about, you're only better than someone if you beat them physically, aren't they? So going about it this way is obviously going to ruffle a lot of feathers. But the way it is handled is very good. However, General Chang, as good as a character as he is, I do feel the Shakespeare quotes are somewhat overused. We're basically going back to Khan again, aren't we?
Hams it up a bit, yeah.
And to a different extent, it reminds me of an English lit version of the film Paul, which is basically scripted in film quotes. Just tone it down a bit. It would have been a little better, but it just felt a bit silly after a while.
I liked it because it was fun in the movie, and I think Christopher Plummer had a lot of fun with that. He's just spinning around in his chair, firing off Shakespeare.
Yeah,
but the idea that the Klingons like Shakespeare, who's a human author, I would imagine the Klingons would have their own version of Klingon exceptionalism. Because in their own empire, if you're Klingon, you're top tier. If you're anybody else inside the Klingon Empire, you're not in for a great time, as I've exampled earlier with Runependi. And I think that they would have had their own author who might have been an equivalent of Shakespeare. And as well, when they're talking about human exceptionalism in the Federation, that could also be projection. Like they're just seeing that's the filter through which they see them.
I enjoyed Spock being a relative of Arthur Conan Doyle. That was quite a nice little inclusion.
Oh, that's a brilliant. I think that's right up there with all of the Shakespearean quotes that General Chang makes.
So Jim mentioned earlier we've got the action sequence of a bird of prey. I thought that was one of the best action sequences we've had since Wrath of Khan with its ship battle, because we've got an invisible threat, which is really cool, and then we've got this sort of beefed up special effects, which were also pretty cool. And there's a really good sort of sense of urgency and danger around this. Now, one issue that I did take, it's like I'm shaking this film. I really enjoyed this one, but one issue I did take was the way that they resolved this whole thing by going, we need to find out where this meeting is going to be taking place. You're like, okay, cool. It's awesome. How are you going to find that out? They just call up Sulu and he tells them. Like, that was the same as we just had in part 5, of, all right, how are we going to defeat the Klingons? We'll ask that guy and he'll stop them. Right? Like, I don't know. That felt like too much of a plot contrivance. I wish we'd just been like a code to crack or something like that, as opposed to.
Oh, don't say that. I hope that's not why they gave Sulu command of the Excelsior, just so he could explain that to the rest of the cast. That is, isn't it? That's why he's in captain of the Excelsior.
Well, not only that, it does help them with that climactic space battle as well, which I've got to say the dramatic stakes in that one did seem to be upped a lot in comparison to the previous film.
Yeah.
Where they're, lock onto the radiation emissions or whatever from the cloaked bird of prey, and as soon as Sulu's ship comes along as well, that they've got him basically, and that just the way that all builds up was fantastic.
Let's give them something else to shoot at.
Yeah.
But then General Chang, when as soon as his sensors detect the Excelsior entering weapons range, he goes, the game's afoot. Which I don't think is a Shakespearean thing. I think it's another Conan Doyleism.
Yeah. Just thinking, with when you're mentioning human exceptionals in part about the Klingons and Shakespeare, you also have when Spock introduces the old Vulcan proverb that only Nixon could have gone to China. Now, I just sort of thought, okay, well, that's already a human proverb. Right? And I don't know, that bothered me. It was this weird little bit of slightly derpy kind of universe building, which I don't think needed. The article it was quite fun, but
yeah, there are a few goofy moments. Is it the bit where Kirk and Dr. McCoy are beamed away from the just about to get shot? But the Klingons
I like that. Since you're about to die anyway, why not tell you his name is, and then they get beamed out. I kind of like that one-eyed Klingon.
Yeah, you've got Kirk yelling at Spock, you could have given us a couple more seconds, but you and the Doctor might have been killed. The night is still young.
We were talking about Valeris earlier. What do you reckon? So Spock is. I don't think with Spock there's anything sexual going on there. The relationship they have is clearly intimate in that it's a personalized relationship they have. But what do you think she's thinking? Do you think she's in love with him?
No.
Because I was wondering. Well, yeah, fair enough. I was wondering about that. What she was thinking of all this. Because it's like she's like going in to look at his art and things. I thought that was where the conflict was coming in for her about, all right, well, am I really going to be kind of selling this crew out here? But I was also like, what are they really doing with these two? Is it just like a sort of teacher or mentor mentee relationship, or is this something else?
Yeah, I just saw it as they were trying to make them look close. Therefore, when it is revealed that she has betrayed him and the rest of the Federation, it just adds a bit more weight to it.
He's disappointed in her. I wouldn't have said it was romantic, but I would have said it was definitely, at the very least, Padawan and master, but no, mentor and student. But I would say that in that framework that Valeris was Spock's favourite, or she was the best performing one of the class. Whatever it was that Spock was.
What wasn't it hinted at her being his successor, basically?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to slightly change the subject. What did we all think about the shape-shifting woman on Urubende?
Very big Arnie vibes, the way she chewed on that cigar, I've got to say.
I was not expecting anyone to compare her to Arnold Schwarzenegger. Although, yeah, we probably could have done with the Predator theme music at that point.
Well, funny you should say that, because the lasers they were using for the mining was the
Yes.
3 dots.
It was. You're right. I've always thought that on that sequence. I did notice that when she shrinks down into the little girl, her eyes are still yellow. And when her normal, the actress that plays her, has these yellow eyes. And when she turned into William Shatner, you can actually tell which one's which from the yellow eyes. That was the one detail this entity couldn't change.
Well, that bit was goofy, but goes to show he would kiss himself if he had the opportunity.
I think they're having a little fun at William Shatner's expense here.
Definitely.
Yeah, that sequence is quite good fun. It was like Superman 3, where Superman fights himself. I guess it was that, but on a bit more of a budget. I thought the shapeshifter concept was quite cool. I did think that it made sense when they explained it, but why the escape was as easy as it was, because the escape was part of a kind of a bluff, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's not. I thought the character was okay. We saw her in quite a few different forms. I thought that so they did use the shapeshifter concept, unlike when they introduce a concept they don't really take advantage of in the next one, which we'll come to in a bit. But I thought that's a good sequence.
Yeah, and when she kisses Kirk in his bunk, and you just see Dr. McCoy's reaction. Again, I think that was just there for, here we fucking go again.
Yeah.
A few other parts here. When we get to the finale, I thought the ensemble aspect was again a good strength of it, because it didn't feel like anyone was really extra. Like it's Scotty that ends up saving the day in this one, which I thought was quite unexpected.
Well, the way he boots that door off its hinges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They all got to be heroes. It was Sulu that got Admiral Cartwright. I think McCoy caught the Romulan ambassador Nanclus. Kirk did the thing of leaping onto the president to avoid the phaser blast. They all had something to do in that sequence. Although, as soon as they hit the deck, I always quite like the way Shatner goes, Kirk, Enterprise.
Yes.
As though Enterprise is his surname.
Yeah, that whole sequence was really quite good. It was also just one of those quite nice action sequences, which I think something the films don't really do very well is fight sequences. Usually they're quite scrappy, which we might be coming to later on. Who knows? But at the same time, who the hell knows what number 7 will be like? This one, it did that thing of like being, I would say, uncharacteristically tense for the franchise. I think the franchise is more about the imagination than the sophistication of the action sequences. So this was a really good one.
Well, absolutely. As I said, with the preceding space fight, it actually feels like there are genuine stakes in this one. And even though, it's going to have a happy ending, you still feel like they could miss their window. Like they might get there too late. Like everything accumulates as it does, but they're really tight against the clock. And this is one of the few films like this where you genuinely do think they could miss it. It just feels like that could happen.
And it all builds up to what's quite a heartfelt ending, where we have it's kind of steps out of the narrative a bit. We've got the signatures coming up on screen. We've got the sort of ending monologue, and I just thought that was a really nice, really affecting sign-off that we got there, literally. I think that you compare this to Star Trek Nemesis, the kind of goodbye to the characters. No quality spoilers for what we thought of Star Trek Nemesis, but I think that this feels like a satisfying goodbye. And I thought that, and as something that's also bringing to a close not just a collection of 6 films, but a series that by this point has existed for about 30 years or something like that here. But they're able to say, well, we're bringing peace between the Federation and the oldest enemy that we have in this. And admittedly, the Klingons don't really learn from this because they'll continue to be bad guys in later outings. But there's something about that in the context of the movie feels historic. And also in the context of the series, having a finale feels historic. It's a film that's almost like, it's got a sense of its own importance in the franchise that it's a part of.
Yeah, it does feel like a send-off, a proper one this time. Like the other films, there's lots of chat about aging and retirement and so on and so forth. But this one definitely does feel the most final of the films that
I
we've come
actually
forward.
I think this one is where the aging and retirement themes are perhaps the most pertinent, the most relevant. In many ways, aging and getting older has been a theme since the very first film, the motion picture. Yeah, they could have probably come in a bit later with that theme, I think.
I guess it's the way that you've got to say, look, we know these actors don't look like they did in the TV series anymore. But I guess what I did like about the way that all of these films have kind of handled aging is that it's like the characters have kind of been through and are now leaving a midlife crisis, kind of reinvigorated. And as they go off at the end, there's this feeling of triumph. They're going, all right, well, we're going to do our final thing, and then we're going to move on to our undiscovered country, which I guess is going to be for them retirement. What's this going to look like? Which we find out in the next movie, which we'll do in just a moment. Let's do ratings for this one first. Jim, I'm going to start with yourself. What do you reckon for Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country?
Dramatically, it's probably the best of the 6 films. You've got your political intrigue, prison breaks, spies, assassins, all of the hallmarks of a great dad movie. It's not quite as thrilling as The Wrath of Khan, and not as funny as The Voyage Home. But overall, it could have left on a much worse note. Look at the previous film. Yes. As I've said before, it hasn't struck me quite as good as Wrath of Khan did, or even Voyage Home for that matter. So I think I will give it a 4.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you on that one. I think I go with a 4 for this as well. It doesn't all entirely work for me, but I think the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And in this case, I like that we are getting a movie about the entire crew, Nothing in this universe here can contend with the whole crew working together. The strongest enemies can't compete with the full squad. And the Cold War commentary, I think, is done with a bit more nuance than before. Like, for instance, when we have Gorkin's a far more convincing representative than Kirk is. I like that we've got Kirk having to change as the film goes on, as opposed to the Klingons having to change. And some of the most tense action sequences. Basically, I think this is a 4. I think it doesn't reach the heights of the franchise so far. I prefer both Wrath of Khan and The Voyage Home. But at the same time, I think there's a lot to like about this. And it's a big step up from number 5 as well. And Alasdair, what about yourself?
I'm going to be in agreement, actually. I'm going to give it 4 stars. And I would say that for the original cast of the original series of movies, Wrath of Khan is clearly the best. I'd say Voyage Home would be my second. And this is a very comfortable 3rd place. I know that it's that thing of all the even-numbered Star Trek movies are good and the odd-numbered ones are bad. And whilst we're in the original series movies, that very much holds true. This is far, far, far better than the motion picture or Final Frontier. It's a film I can easily watch again. It's just not quite 2 or 4. So I'm going to give it 4 stars.
Yes. Well, we mentioned the curse of the even-numbered entries. Let's find out how Star Trek Generations does.
I take it the odds are against us and the situation is grim.
You could say that. Sounds like fun.
Rogue One, engage! Let's go!
Oh boy, Star Trek Generations. This is where we finally have 2 iconic captains sharing the screen together. Now, I'm going to ask you guys to join me in the thought experiment for this. It's the year 2023, and we're getting a movie where Picard shares the screen with Kirk. And during the course of that movie, Kirk dies. Could you imagine how the internet would have responded to this film if it came out tomorrow? Like, this would have been absolutely savage. Like, people would be looking at, like...
It's scandalous.
You'd be looking at, like, the controversy of The Last Jedi or whatever one before that was, Force Awakens. You'd be looking at the controversy of those or, like, some of the later Marvel ones, and you go, none of that would compare to the audacity of killing off Kirk in the film that he shares with Picard and comes at retirement for basically no reason. Like, this is one of those movies that when I first saw this, I really, really disliked it. And part of it was because of that. What I thought was the kind of needless death of Kirk and the kind of how underwhelming it was when they had the opportunity to have these two icons sharing the screen. At the same time, on rewatch, I actually quite enjoyed this. I think I've reevaluated all three of these films on this rewatch. I like number 5 less than I previously did. I like 6 even more than I previously did. And this one, I thought this was down there with the Motionless Picture, but it's better. I think this actually really did stand up to rewatch in the way that I wasn't expecting. There's still some things I absolutely can't stand about it, but at the same time, there's quite a lot of good in this one too. Alasdair, what about yourself? Right, as a Trekkie, when you're coming into this one, did you know that Kirk died in this? And what did you think when it happened?
I did know because it was splashed all over the newspapers at the time. So your little thought experiment's right on the money because this film came out in 94, 95, 94. The internet wasn't even nascent at that time. And yeah, there was people were writing letters of outrage, whereas today they'd be tweeting. So this film's burdened with it's basically burdened with terminating a character that it didn't necessarily need to for the story to function. I mean, they'd already done their swan song. The Enterprise went off into the sunset. So I knew going into this film that Kirk was going to die. But what I will say about the Next Generation movies that I don't think is necessarily true of the original series movies is that with the original series movies, you don't need to watch the TV show. You can just jump in and watch these movies and know what's going on. I think with the Next Generation movies, there's a bit more sort of head up assness in the sense that they expect you to watch the TV show to know what's going on. Like Lursa and Bator, the two Klingon sisters. There's so much backstory between those two and the main crew of the Enterprise. And they got handled badly in this film as well, it actually has to say. Kirk is literally not the only casualty of this movie. The Enterprise D got handled badly in this film. This film's got quite the kill count. Those sisters, Kirk, and the Enterprise D. The Enterprise D was right with the Enterprise. Kirk's Enterprise, we get what we call starship porn. There's him looking on lustfully at the Enterprise, beautiful shots of the Enterprise. The Enterprise D is introduced in like a reverse shot. It's like in a horror film when the villain is introduced, but you hear them speak, but the shot has them framed like the back of their head. It's like we see the back of the Enterprise D's head before we see any glory shots of it. So I like this film, don't get me wrong. I do enjoy this film, but I also have some issues with it.
I just want to agree with something you said there when you mentioned that they assume a level of knowledge from the audience, which we don't have the early ones. I completely agree that this isn't it certainly would be an entry point for a casual fan or anything like that. In fact, I'd say as someone who's not really familiar with the Next Gen crew, I didn't really get too much of a feel for like Riker, for instance, or like Doctor Crusher.
Yeah.
You know, I never really got a feel for who they are as individuals because it becomes basically for large sections you've got the Picard and Data show for reasons we'll come to in a moment. But then you also have Kirk's kind of there as well. So it's sort of, I didn't really emerge from that feeling a huge affinity for the crew. I did more on rewatch. I think to go further into the film, as the Enterprise is crashing, I think that whole sequence is actually very well done. It's got a nice chaotic energy that's really not present in the A plot. But I think something that does come across when you have...
Weirdly enough.
Yeah, something that comes across when you've got Shatner and Picard sharing the screen is we're okay, well, these are two very different characters, but we're also looking at two very different actors. You know, we've got like this different sort of generations of hero here, despite the age gap between them really isn't all that. And I think an awkward point of tension about it is that Patrick Stewart is such a better actor than William Shatner. And you're looking at two very different types of acting, but also two very different levels of quality when it comes to the acting. And I just didn't feel like for the build-up of you're going to see these two guys on the screen together, which I guess nowadays, if you're watching say you're watching like a Marvel franchise and you go, okay, well, we can have Captain America and Iron Man meet, and that's just totally normal in this franchise. You can have Doctor Strange meet Spider-Man, and that's totally normal. But it isn't totally normal in Star Trek, and it should have been a bigger event. Whereas it feels like when the two of them do finally speak to each other, I mean, Kirk farts around in his horse and then changes his mind just so we can see Shatner do the same stunt twice, or somebody else do that stunt. I assume it wasn't really him.
He, on the horse, he walks around Picard, and then his horse sidles up to Picard's horse by doing sideways shuffling. I'm watching this like, Shatner, you're just showing off. Like, we all know that the only reason we're on horses here is because in real life you own a ranch and you love horses. And you're going to get these horses in just as he did in Star Trek 5. He's horsing around.
So let's cover Act 1 first here, right? Act 1, I think we'd all agree was pretty strong, right? You know, where you've got Kirk and the B team suddenly show up. Where it's going, oh, I got my two sidekicks. And, it's like, and then they go, oh, it's
McCoy and Spock, DeForest Kelley and Leonard Nimoy declined acting roles in this film, feeling that they had completed their journey in the previous film. And you can sort of tell in the lines that they say. There's one point when Chekhov says, do you have medical staff on board? And they don't arrive. Nothing arrives on the Enterprise B until Tuesday. So it goes... this is another replay of the Star Trek V Enterprise being in such poor shape before they send them out. You know, the TV shows, they never do this with Starship. Starfleet, they're fully equipped. They're locked and stocked and ready to rock when they leave space dock. Not in the movies. So Chekhov says to two of the media journalists that are there, you just became nurses. Like, that's meant to be a McCoy line. And I think Scotty says a Spock line when the captain of, who's Alan Ruck, the captain of the Enterprise B, is a bit unsure, a bit wary, and Kirk is like, because he knows what to do, he's sort of shifting awkwardly in his seat like he wants to speak up. And Scotty leans over and goes, is there something wrong with your chair, Captain? It just feels like, that feels a bit Spock to me.
I like the idea of it just cuts to Scotty having a sit down with folk, and he says something along the lines of, in accepting the inevitable, one finds peace. Nothing unreal exists. Something along these lines. Because, it didn't feel quite right. But I did like seeing this captain played by Conor Roy from Succession. Sorry to the actor whose name I've temporarily forgotten.
Alan Ruck.
Alan Ruck, yes. It's good sort of seeing him kind of like shiting it basically as things are starting to go wrong. But then Kirk kind of goes, you know what, you're the captain, you stay on the bridge. An act of heroism there. You know, Kirk was clearly the better man to have been on the bridge during this catastrophe. But at the same time, you know, he just leads it to him and then goes off.
Shows growth, actually. It shows growth, and that this Kirk is not the same Kirk that stole the Enterprise from Decker in the motion picture. He knows this is where he loves being on the captain's chair, but he's accepted that his time's over, and he's accepted it in a way that he didn't in the motion pictures. So I kind of like that bit.
Yeah, I think that whole bit works very nicely. And then, like, there is a good sense of danger, once they go and they're at that bit where Kirk was, well, from what we think, died. And I thought that worked very nicely. And it was then quite strange to go from there into the holodeck, where we have the kind of like buffoonery of the next gen crew.
Yeah, I've always found that transition a little jarring. I don't know why. It's obvious they're on the holodeck. Well, assuming you're acquainted with Next Generation, as we've already discussed. But
I really feel that I should have drawn a list up of things where Star Trek Generations is not a good entry point. Because if you're new to Trek, you're like, what the fuck is going on here? What? It says 87 years later, but it looks like it's 400 years earlier. And you get the crew goofing around in the holodeck. So that was the holodeck introduction. If I'll make a list off the top of my head just now, the motion chip, the shield harmonics, there's a whole bunch of things in this film that they're just there and they're not explained. How the Klingons were able to shoot through the shields. That's a whole system that if you don't know what that is, you're like, well, what is going on here?
I think the frequency of the shields isn't quite as referential. It's a different time now, isn't it? It's a lot further in the future, and I think they can get away with that one. But there are a lot of mentions of like the Borg and so on.
Yeah, the Romulans and Borg both got shouted.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with that, then it's just going to go over your head. Like, because I made a note to myself to see if this is as accessible as it should be. While I'm watching it, I thought, I'll just jot down if this is a good jumping in point if you're not familiar with this crew. Yeah. I mean, luckily for me, I'd watched quite a bit of Next Generation before I'd seen this. I mean, at the time, I remember a lot of the promotional stuff for it back when it came out. I really liked the look of it, but I never actually got to see it until about 10, 15 years ago. I remember vividly the scene of the saucer section crashing into the planet, and I thought that was so good. At this point, I hadn't seen any of the previous films anyway, so this was a new thing to me. I was like, oh, that can do that. And something occurred to me in that opening scene, and then in the following saucer section a bit later on. By this point, you would have thought they'd fit seatbelts on the bridge. The amount of times people are getting flung over chairs and
it's been a delightful trope in every movie. The Enterprise gets shot.
Health and safety nightmare.
To each side. With this one, we've got some really elaborate leaps through the air and things as the Enterprise is crashing. But yes, seatbelts. Always wear a seatbelt. Let's go on to the actual premise of this movie. So the actual premise of this movie is we have Dr. Sauron, and he's wanting to get into the Nexus, which is basically, it's a reverse event horizon. He's like, I want to open up this
pleasure realm.
Yeah, this pleasure realm, and then I want to go back there.
I want joy, lots of joy.
Yeah. I can't forget it. It was just so good, right? And so he's just trying to get back into this, and I thought that as a basic premise, it's okay. As a villain, I really wish if they'd gone with a slightly lower set of stakes for it, because you have that he's knowingly going to cause a genocide here. And I would rather that was just a possibility, because if his whole thing is just, I want to open this thing so I can get pleasure, you go, okay, cool. And if you go, right, he's opening this, he wants to get pleasure, and there is a risk to other people, so there's still a responsibility to commit. But instead, they had to do that thing which they did in the most recent Bond film, where the baddie's basic motivation doesn't work, so they have to make them speak more about it in these kind of lofty lessons. But the problem is that the action itself is impossible to justify. So he's like, yes, I wish to commit an act of genocide for my own selfish gain. And very like, but you'll kill lots of people. He goes, we all die. Oh, you're deep. I just sort of felt like, if you're going to have a character trying to commit an act of genocide, the motivation has to be airtight. Anne had no such intention. He didn't want to commit genocide, and you know what? He was a great baddie. And number 6 there. It's not about committing a genocide. It's about stopping a peace process, which is also quite a good motivation of this. And again, of course, Christopher Plummer is just simply a better actor than Malcolm McDowell. But at the same time, like this one, I just sort of thought there is already an interesting human motivation of, the Nexus is different for everyone. And I sort of wonder what sort of pain is the Doctor in that he's willing to do this. And I wish if he'd humanized that, given him a bit more psychological depth beyond just, I'm going to explode the planet because my pleasure comes first. It's remind me of, Father Ted, where the other guy takes over from Father Jack. He's the one who the priest listens to jungle music. He's talking to Ted and he goes, I took your car and I crashed it into a brick wall. Your car's broken, but I had my fun. And that's all that matters, right? And that was the vibe I was getting off him in this. Whereas I'm going to explode the planet. What of it? I just thought, no, it's too big. It's too big. Just he's got an already relatable motivation. So let's explore it a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it does go over the fact that his home world was destroyed by the Borg, which is where they get name dropped in this. And he was already in a Nexus before he was pulled out by the Enterprise, because while that was happening was only moments for us. It could have felt like a long time for him, because obviously time is not present in the Nexus. So he could have been having the most amazing times. I mean, it's not to justify the fact he's going to destroy the entire fucking solar system. But, his motivation is that, we don't know what he saw in the Nexus, but he's basically stopping at nothing to get back there.
Can I just say, Dr. Tolian Soren was having a whale of a time until Scotty beamed him up.
Yeah, although I don't think Soren is a particularly great villain, but his monologuing is. I could have listened to him going on.
Yeah, I really liked his... and his monologuing was his own. He wasn't quoting Shakespeare. As much as I do love Christopher Plummer, I actually like Dr. Tolian Soren in this. And there is a good connection in the sense that both Tolian Soren and Guinan, and this is another thing from the TV show, Guinan are both a race of aliens called Elorians, and they were the ones that were being rescued by the Enterprise B. And in a time that whatever course, and I presume it must be circular, that this ribbon's just going around in circles. By the time it gets back round, Tolian Soren's wanting to get back into it. And that's where we introduce us to the Enterprise D crew. So I think that sort of ties up, that links the Enterprise B to the D a bit better, as well as just having the two captains meet.
Yeah, and we see the rather opulent stellar cartography, which they project the course. It's very good. They project the course of the ribbon.
Yeah.
And
that whole sequence looked amazing. I
actually forgot about this from when I watched it previously. So seeing it again, I was like, oh, wow, this is great. Like, they could probably do this on the holodeck, really, rather than having its own dedicated part of the starship for this. But projecting the course of the ribbon, it's just a bit too coincidental that the absolute expanse of space that this ribbon travels, and they have to knock it off course slightly to just touch this one planet where they couldn't, possibly plot it to somewhere a bit further on or closer to its trajectory. It just coincidentally has to be moved by destroying an entire solar system.
Two. I mean, he blew up one at the beginning of the film.
Oh, of course, yeah.
He's a bit of a cad.
Yeah.
I think there's some good thematics in this. I guess if the film's really about anything here, we've already had number 5. We had the whole sort of friends as family. Number 6, I guess we're going with about the sort of the peace process here. And this time around, I guess what we're looking at is the idea that, and they did hint at this in part 5, that the sort of honor and privilege of being a space captain is incompatible with the fulfilling family life they have. It's almost a bit like the Last Temptation of Christ, where we have Picard seeing the Christmas the Christmas that he could have if he just stayed in this fantasy world. And it's something we see people. It's a theme as old as sci-fi, really. If you can have this kind of fantasy, can fantasy be better than reality? I mean, one of the Marvel films just did this recently as well with WandaVision and the Multiverse of Madness. And and then with Kirk, you have the same thing of his life isn't going to be based around having lots and lots of kids and stuff like Picard's, but instead what we have with him is this clear regret that he never did settle down. That it was too late. And as he proudly announces he's going to propose, which is definitely not something you do when you're walking into a room that you're about to propose in. It kind of ruins the action.
He shouts it out. He shouts it out. Spoiler alert.
She probably wouldn't necessarily say yes, but she go, you told him before you asked me, but were you seeking permission off Picard?
Who is this? Who is this man that you told before you asked?
But yeah, I thought that that was also quite well done, though. Or at least conceptually, it was well done with the sort of thing of the road less travelled. You can see to an extent why they want to be the Nexus. Now, how they leave the Nexus is anybody's guess. Or you can just wish yourself out.
You just decide to go. But what bugs me is that, and I want to go into a bit of Nexus anti-lore because none of the Nexus makes sense. Do you know how Guinan is in the Nexus and speaks to Picard? And they're in this big palatial living room, yet she's randomly on a life-size carousel of unicorns going round in a circle. I don't know what the art department were doing that day, but we have this thing, let's just use it for the film. She's an echo. She's in the Nexus and outside of the Nexus, and she's an echo of the person that he knows as Guinan. Surely that would also imply that there's an echo of Tolian Soren inside the Nexus as well. That could have added some dramatic stakes, but they didn't do that because it would have drawn attention away from the Kirk Picard meet cute. So they leave the Nexus. They go to Meridian 3. Now, presumably Picard has entered back into his own body at an earlier time because he's going back into there with the knowledge on the outcome. But Kirk's just appearing fresh in a whole new body, all his own, and they're both taking on Tolian Soren. Now remember, worst case scenario, Picard and Kirk fuck up and they don't beat the bad guy, right? All they have to do is wait, go back into the ribbon, then leave the ribbon, rinse, repeat.
That's exactly what I was thinking the moment they came out. I was just, because obviously, having seen this before, I know what's coming, and it still leaves a bad taste in the mouth. But you think, well, if you have messed up, just go back in the Nexus. You can see your annoyingly Tory kids again for a bit if you want to. And go back, get Kirk again, try again. But Kirk is in a Nexus, and according to not Guinan, it will be like he's only just arrived. If Soren has experienced a Nexus, can they not go to Soren, who is potentially there as well?
Oh, do you know what they could have done? They could have just
battered the fuck out of him while he was in there.
If he's having a cup of tea and his wife's having coffee, they could switch the two. They could upset his idea of paradise. They could take the joy out of it for Soren, so that when Scotty beats him up previously, he doesn't want to go back to the Nexus because Captain Kirk, Captain Picard made it the most annoying place in the universe for him.
Okay, I want to see that from it. Right. The second act of this movie kind of sucked. It was really aimless. The third one should have been what you guys just said, like a bit of tomfoolery, you know.
This film, I've always felt the first act is strong, the middle act middles, and the final act is a bit meh. I think what makes the middle act stronger is everything happening on the Enterprise D, battling with the Klingons, and then crashing into a planet. There's Data's whole subplot.
Yeah, I did not like that. I mean, they set that up by having Data being a prick, basically.
Yeah.
He pushes, is it Dr. Crusher off the boat?
Yeah.
So in order to counteract that, let's turn Data into an annoying dickhead instead, shall we?
Let's say, even though in universe everyone's looking at Data and like scolding him, that's not funny. Every time I watch that scene, I'm like, that's pretty funny.
I mean, like, I think the reactions are quite excessive, considering, like, she literally tells him everyone thinks it's funny because it's a joke. So, you know,
her advice immediately and completely backfires. It's beautiful.
I actually quite like Data's plot in this. I thought the first time I saw it, I found it annoying. When I rewatch, I thought, okay, so the thing is that the actor, what's his face, Brent Spiner. Brent Spiner, right? He's really good. And I think although the character is incredibly annoying in the same way that like a Rob Schneider character is, I think that the way that the other characters kind of respond to him, I think actually served the comedy. I think Alistair's made this point before of it with, like, when you're watching Ace Ventura, everybody has to act as if the way that Ace Ventura is acting is like in some way acceptable or like believable that a human being might be this way, even though there's nobody else in the universe with any reason to believe acts like he does. And I think with this, I liked that, you know, his sort of Data's sort of like dataisms, him being as kind of like irritating as possible in it, is fine because the other characters find him irritating. And it's also kind of endearing because you got this sort of bipolar quality about the way that he handles emotions, and where at the beginning he's loving every emotion that he's feeling. You know, he's very high energy. Then as the film goes on, this actually becomes a burden to him, and you suddenly realize you've got quite a nice tender moment between him and Picard. You know, when they're in the this sort of like map room, and Picard's explaining to him, yeah, you know, this is one of the difficulties with feeling things. Essentially, that it's not always pleasant. You know, it's essentially the equivalent of the Alberts, about how you get up.
Yeah,
and I liked that. I thought like, I mean, again, not knowing the character, I don't know how long Data had been trying to be act like a human in the series. I don't know if that was like a consistent motif. I assume from context that it is. And I thought they handled that with some sensitivity. Basically, I thought that was a good subplot.
Yeah, in my experience of the character from the TV show, he is basically just another Spock. He's the logical character, the one who takes things literally and so on. And they do develop on that and, you know, try to give him more a human side. But I guess this is the way of distancing him from that sort of role of just being the logical one. Here he gets to actually have a personality other than, you know, being cold. And as you say, at some points it's great, like where he's discussing how he was just frozen with fear at the point where Soren was attacking them on that space station. That was really profound and quite really well performed and written. But then you get the moments where he's sat at the helm and is scanning for life forms and singing that.
Yeah. That one I liked. When I first saw this film, I was a lot younger and loved it, of course. But that one didn't age as well for me. But one that I still found funny as the first time I saw it is when he's drinking a drink in 10 Forward and he hates the drink, but he doesn't know how to articulate that he hates the drink. And then Guinan offers him another, and he's like, please, because he wants more of that. It's like, that's funny, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think the Data stuff, I mean, it's completely divorced from the A and the B plot. This is like the C plot or something. but it's. I was trying to find how it would narratively connect with it. And I was trying to think of something along the lines of addiction, in the sense that Soren's clearly just a junkie. He's addicted to the Nexus. He wants to get his Nexus fixed, and he doesn't care what the cost is. And with Data having these emotions, there's that scene where he's addicted to laughter. He's laughing too much, and something's wrong, and they use bad special effects on his face, and he falls over. But you can see him like I mean, LeVar Burton's acting in that scene's quite good, because you always have to remember he has to act through a visor, which covers a significant portion of his face that conceals part of your face that most other actors would be able to act through, and their eyes. But he does a great job of showing someone whose patience is just waning, or they're running out of patience. But he was always in the show. He was always best friends with Data, and it makes sense that it's him in that scene with him. There is an inconsistency between the TV show and the movies, where Data and Geordie LaForge are best friends in the show, but that suddenly just randomly switches to Data and Picard as being best friends in the movies.
I was just thinking about your point about how they fit in. I think that maybe they do. So it's a road less travelled thing here again, where Data thinks that he wants this chip in, and it's not artificially inducing the emotions. It's a bit like the Nexus. It's not, the emotions that he's feeling aren't necessarily real, but they're bringing him closer to what he wants, and then going, I actually don't really want this after all. So I guess he is experiencing, in a way, what both Picard and Kirk experience in the film.
Yeah.
It's what Sauron doesn't experience, because he's still obsessed, as you say, with getting back to this Nexus. He'll put everything else, he'll chuck everything else in the bus. Whereas I think, although actually at the end of the movie, Data still has the chip, though, doesn't he?
Yeah, because it fuses to whatever it was connected to. But I think also going back to what you've mentioned, with regards to the relationship between Data and Picard, I think it's going back to that family little subplot rather than it showing them being best friends. I see it more as Picard being more of a father figure to Data, helping him, get to grip with his emotions and just helping him grow.
I mean, I'm sure you would at least agree that in the movies, Data and Picard are given a lot to do, and much at the expense of just about all of the next gen cast.
Well, at what point do you see Chief Engineer Miles O'Brien in this one?
No, he's on Deep Space Nine by this point.
Exactly.
Although they still get Worf back, but
I mean, at the expense of the best characters. So
I always quite like Worf.
I mean, I think we're looking at Patrick Stewart and Brent Spiner are clearly the best two actors.
Yeah, definitely. Again, that whole cartography section just goes to show it, doesn't it? Really, I mean, that's probably one of the highlights for me. That's where the film peaks.
Now, let's talk about where the film doesn't peak, which is the third act. I think it nosedives a little bit here, which. Particularly the further we get into the third act. So we do some good bits, some glimmers of hope. The whole Nexus stuff worked very well, but we're still watching what's essentially three guys having a very slow, clumsy fight on a rock. It's not good. It's just three old men clumsily fighting each other. It's not even dissimilar to kick out time at your local spoons.
The parts that worked for me in those scenes were the dialogue sections. As I mentioned, you got Soren monologuing to Picard, who is basically stuck behind that force field prior to them entering the Nexus. And they work quite well for me. And again, when they come back and you've got Kirk and Picard, when they're talking, that's still good. I genuinely think that's quite well written, but the action, you've got three old guys scrapping with each other, and Picard, Kirk's definitely past it at this point. I mean, that whole bridge sequence it looks like a crappy fun fair ride, doesn't it? The way the bridge is bouncing up.
I have a question. Is a gun more threatening when the barrel rotates 45 degrees?
It's cooler, so yeah.
Because he does it all throughout the film. And it's
Is it the Star Trek equivalent of holding your gun sideways, like a
but
gangster?
you hold it sideways, but you still get to hold your hand the correct way up.
Yeah.
And he and I noticed this time when the gun shifts the barrel 45 degrees, he sort of tilts his head also when he's doing it. Like, what is this an angel here? What did you guys think of the two Klingon women in this, Lurs and Victor?
They were quite funny, actually. Especially the bit where they're watching the feed through Geordie's visor after they've returned him back to the Enterprise. Because obviously Soren takes him as a hostage when the Klingons beam him aboard after the whole space station explosion.
It's the Armagosa Observatory.
Yeah. And it's just like they're looking at Dr. Crusher. Oh, human females.
Yeah, that was quite a nice bit of, like, I suppose, the cultural differences within the universe they've created here. Oh, that was fun. The Klingons were, again, it seemed slightly superfluous for it, like they did, to a lesser extent than they did in Part 5.
I think the reason that the Klingons were used, and specifically a bird of prey was used, was budgetary. So they could reuse the footage of a bird of prey exploding that they had in stock footage from Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. That's my theory.
Probably not far off. The thing is, the special effects at points look really good. I thought the whole crash sequence was quite
excellent.
Quite fantastic.
That is a highlight of the film,
Yeah.
Just everything about that, from the actual saucer section crashing to the environment around it, just all looked absolutely fantastic.
It was
considering
all
its
so
age as
chaotic.
well.
Like, so chaotic. It was really good high energy shit. I said it was stands in stark contrast to what the real finale of the film is.
Yeah.
I think that's why they must have used it in a lot of the promo footage, as I've mentioned earlier. I remember seeing that a lot when I was younger, when the film had first released, and that's one of the things that made me want to see it.
When we come to the death of Kirk, now I'm not against killing the character, but it doesn't really seem like something worth bringing him out of retirement for. The thing is, we have an open ending for the Undiscovered Country. And unless you're going to make him come back for a really good reason, I don't think it's worth spoiling that. Because you go, okay, maybe some of us imagine that Kirk's just going to be sort of a bachelor, like hanging around by pools, lots of different alien lovers, like having a beer or something like that. Maybe some of us do imagine him on a ranch. And maybe some of us think that he'll end up being like some sort of a universal ambassador and stuff like that. He's going, or maybe he's going to teach people, or we just have him and the boys hanging out singing "Row, row, row, you row your boat again" on like an annual trip or something like that. The thing is, there's lots of possibilities, but imagine if you said to folk, what do you want to see happen to Kirk? Very few would say, I really want to see him come out of retirement for a 2-against-1 fight where he dies in a rock, fighting a guy who's just a bit of an arsehole. Especially as in the universe they've created here, everybody in the Nexus could potentially be recruited. We're just not, and
That's such a good point.
I just thought that was such a kind of letdown there. It was such a nice, heartfelt ending to see Kirk vanishing away at the end of the last one, the literal sign-off. And then we just have this one.
I mean, I think the theory or the philosophy behind this film was to make it a passing of the baton.
Oh, absolutely.
Like the original series over, now we're going to do those theories. But, I mean, is it possible to watch the film series and then from motion picture through to the Undiscovered Country, skip generations and go straight into First Contact? Probably. I mean, was a passing the baton necessary given how well it ended in the Undiscovered Country?
Yeah, and in terms of the actual heroism of the situation, like, the way that you've got him kind of being crushed and, you're saying, all right, the relationship's only defined by rank and duty. It's not really individuated. So what do you think of the actual way in which he died. Not just that he died, but the actual way that he died.
Well, you know, all those episodes of Star Trek that ended with a captain on the bridge, and it all ends with a bridge on the captain.
I thought that was very well done. You look so unamused.
Jim wasn't amused.
Almost angry at this.
And his last words were George Takei's, "Oh my."
Yeah. It's underwhelming, I think. A good joke. But yeah, the I don't know if they even needed to do a passing of the torch. This film could have been made without even including any of the original crew.
Yeah,
they could have quite easily have just had, the Nexus being Picard learning from his mistakes from his last encounter, and then remembering not to do that the next time. But I did like the clash of personalities with Kirk and Picard. I mean, the two completely different captains. Picard very diplomatic, methodical. Kirk very impulsive and casual, I suppose. And then it just felt, I don't know, probably a bit too understated considering the weight of the moment. It was just very stupid. You've got that ridiculous bridge like bobbling up and down as if it's on some sort of hydraulic.
It looks like it's made out of paper mache.
Yeah.
Remember that Picard saves Kirk from the falling bridge, then Kirk then immediately turns around and walks back down that very bridge.
Yeah. It's and then you see him like holding on to it as it's falling, and it's just very, very silly.
I will say that the reason the ending does feel a bit slapdash is because it is for the reason that it was reshot because test audiences didn't like how Kirk was originally killed, which actually involved Soren using his gun tilted at 45 degrees, shooting Kirk in the back.
Ooh, I wouldn't like that either.
Yeah, audiences didn't either, so they changed it to this. That this is the improved version.
I mentioned earlier that this film introduces a sci-fi concept and doesn't really do anything with it. And in this case, the sci-fi concept introduces time travel here, right? And throughout this, as they're going, okay, well, why don't you round up the troops, go off and fight Soren on the Rock? Why does he just go back to the scene where the two of them previously met and then arrest him?
Yeah, I mean...
It would be quite a sensible idea, if you ask me.
You had him in your clutches.
Like, I would just say, like, bring in a rule, we go, you can go back in time, but only for a period of 10 minutes. Like, something along those lines.
It's just an arbitrary choice that the writers made in universe,
I like what you're saying about how they could just have done this as many times as they want. Like, they could have just done the Doctor Strange, putting him in the time loop as he continues to have to fight Picard and Kirk.
Yeah, it's a silly little plot hole that should have been tightened up, really. But the more you pick at it, the more it unravels. And I've got to say, despite that, it's still quite enjoyable overall.
Yeah, overall.
Yeah, it's better than I thought it was.
I guess because in this film, Kirk's already dead. He's been dead for nearly 80 years or whatever, or considered that. He was ripped from the hull of the previous Enterprise, which was a great shot, actually. If you've got Scotty and Chekhov looking up. That was, again, going back to the special effects, that looked brilliant.
It did.
Yeah, so just to kill off Kirk the way they do, and then just to bury him under a pile of rocks. It's just a bit more of, adding that insult to the injury.
It's not Spock's death.
No, definitely.
That was handled excellently, and this wasn't. And also, he died falling down the side of that mountain. So Picard brought him all the way back up to the top of the mountain, to then bury him under a pile of rocks. Okay. Given that the Enterprise was completely fucked by this point and couldn't have used their transporters.
I was just thinking another big issue with the ending here is that the best of the Star Trek films, or the best conflicts in the Star Trek films, as you say, are the ones that are quite personalised. In this case, it just really isn't. Like, I don't think there's enough of a relationship between either a man and Sauron for the gravity of what he's about to do in the series.
Soren felt more like a villain to Guinan than he did to Kirk or Picard.
Yeah. I know in Endgame, they have quite a nice line where Scarlet Witch, says, "You took everything from me," and Thanos is like, "I don't even know who you are," right? And that's feasibly what they could have done in here in a way, because, like, he doesn't know who
Well, he
Kirk
does
is.
go. I mean, there's a subverted expectation. There's a reuse of shot where two legs come into focus. Soren's looking at his little data pad, and then he looks up and he has a fight with Picard. That shot's redone, but this time it's Kirk, and he goes, "Who the hell are you?" I quite like that line, yeah. But it also means that whilst it's a good line, there is no connection between hero and villain here. It's not.
I actually quite liked that line, but I think you could have done that better if Picard had a more personal issue with this guy to begin with, rather than, like, they have for interrogation earlier where he's like, "Oh, we're investigating." We all know that, like, they don't really go to any great lengths to disguise that it's him who's the baddie, because he's played by Malcolm McDowell, who plays him as a baddie, right? But that sequence aside, they don't really, they don't have any lasting relationship here or anything, and I think that could have been quite good if you're bringing Kirk out of retirement for this very personal vendetta, whereas he's kind of like the sort of monster of the week. He's just there as another baddie.
If it weren't for the passing of the torch thing we're going through, this could quite easily have been a two-parter of the TV series, just looking a bit better.
Folks, I think we are going to wrap up this one. Let's go into star ratings for Generations. Alasdair, we'll start with you this time. What is your star rating for Generations? And any final thoughts you may have on the film?
Well, the music, absolutely. Again, it's a totally original soundtrack, and I love it. I really like the soundtrack to this movie. There's certainly a lot of good Star Trek soundtracks, and this is no exception. It's the whole way through the soundtrack spot on, even when the story falls apart. There's a lot to like in this film. The performances, seeing some of your favorite characters one last time, and saying hello to cinematic next gen. I want to comment that they do get their uniforms a bit muddled up. If you know your Trek at all, there's a difference between the Next Generation outfits and the Voyager outfits. And in this film, they just seem to be switching between the two arbitrarily. So to put that down to another budgetary issue, but there's still the ending. It just folds like a Jeep suit. So it'll be I'm going to give this 3.5 stars.
I'd be slightly harsher, but more generous than I was previously. I previously gave this 2.5. I think I'm going to bring it up to 3. And it's quite a good 3. It's not quite 3.5, but it's still quite a good 3. I mean, something I didn't mention was they've got a kind of darker aesthetic about the whole thing. It just looked a bit less polished, and I thought that was quite nice. And I think there's a lot of good ideas in here. For me, if 6 was stronger than the sum of its parts, I think this is kind of weaker than the sum of its parts. But you consider all the things that it had on side: a good premise, a good cast, 2 iconic captains. I just thought it under-delivered, but at the same time, I certainly don't dislike it as much as I used to. And so that's good. Jim, what yourself?
Yeah, I'm in that same camp, really. I remember the first time I saw this, I was horrendously underwhelmed. And the Nexus stuff, I just lost interest by that point. But I don't know whether it's because I've grown up a bit, matured or what. But like back when I first saw it, those kids grated. It might be me aging or parenthood has changed my perspective, but I genuinely was on board with that being Picard's idea of a perfect life. It was Christmas, there was food being cooked, his wife and kids were there. The only thing that was missing for me was a Nintendo Switch, and I would have been as happy as a pig in shit, I've got to tell you. Despite us picking holes in it, like there's lots of inconsistencies, but there's a lot here to really enjoy as well. I think I have a bit more of an affinity for it because I'm more au fait with the next gen crew than I was the original series crew. That's not to disregard it. I mean, you know how much I liked the other films and how I enjoy a lot of the characters, but there's just something more special for me about it being the next generation crew. And have you ever seen the episode of The Simpsons, Lisa Gets Married?
Oh, yes.
Where she has a vision of the future, and there's a lot of robots in the future. And when the robots cry, their heads melt and explode. I was kind of hoping that would have happened to Data at the end, just for a bit of a hilarious. Because seeing him cry just kind of ruined that whole emotion thing for me. Like, I understand he's overwhelmed with joy, but how? How does he cry? Surely
Dr. Soon built in fully functional tear ducts to a robot that has no feelings.
Sheer willpower.
But otherwise, I've got to say, I think I might be erring towards a 4 for this one as well.
Yeah.
Like, maybe it was just the low expectations from my memories of it prior to watching it. But even then, I would have given this a 3 before we were talking about it. But having gone over it a bit more again, and a lot of the scenes I really enjoyed and thought were brilliant, and a lot of the cast, and they fumbled the ball with the actual overall reason for this film existing is getting the two captains together. But I had a great time watching it.
Yeah, and I think you're totally right about I guess the themes I can imagine resonating more with age, because this is basically a film about what life could have looked like if you hadn't made the choices that you made, and something that maybe if it had leaned into it a bit more, it doesn't have to be like sliding doors or anything like that, but that struck me as the heart of this film.
I want to comment on something that happens in this film. That this is my final thought, really, because I didn't mention it earlier, but it's something I found was a bit harsh in the sense that we don't get to see Captain Picard at his best. Really, is that his brother Rene and his brother Robert and his nephew Rene are killed off screen in a fire, and the whole vineyard is destroyed. And I just found like just killing off his family, just so
harsh,
that he's a bit emotional, and when he gets into the Nexus, we can have that, as you say, cheese grating family approach him. I found that was just a bit of a harsh thing to do to the character, but it seems to have been retconned in the TV show Star Trek Picard anyway. So there's that.
Folks, we're just about to finish up, but we have time for a top 10. Right, guys, I have in front of me, this should be a very quick one here. I have in front of me ranking the Star Trek captains' catchphrases. There are 12 catchphrases for captains in this show. The question is, what order are they in? Give me some catchphrases, guys.
Make it so.
That is on the list.
Is it number 1?
It's not actually at number 1.
Okay.
There's one in front of it.
I want to say that if the phrase "beat me up, Scotty's" on there, it shouldn't be. Technically, that was never said.
It's not on there. Now these are all captain
good stuff.
ones, but it's not on there.
So these are all just captains. Okay.
I'm trying to think, what does Janeway say? Shoot to kill. Let's go say. I don't like Cardassians.
I don't think Cisco's really got a go-to.
I don't know. I don't think he does he? Get the hell out of my office.
See, if it was Odo, I'd have plenty of those. Quark.
Yeah. We come in peace.
Cisco does have one, by the way.
Oh, what is that?
Cisco's catchphrase, according to denofgeek.com's ranking. Apparently his catchphrase is, do it.
I wouldn't have got that.
He doesn't.
I definitely believe he said that. I don't think he said it enough to qualify as a catchphrase.
No, it's not like Mr. Sulu, take us out. Is it early?
Yeah, no. Oh, is there some new Trek in there as well? Is there Michael Burnham's Let's Fly?
Yes, Let's Fly is at number 3.
If we
Got 3. Wow. It's higher than I would have
So
put
we
it.
have at number 3 is Let's Fly. We have number 2 is Make It So. Now let's go back up to the beginning here. So the first one here, Saru tries this one out in Sanctuary, but Captain Kirk actually used it in Star Trek V, The Final Frontier.
Oh, don't make me think of that film again.
It's one word, he says.
Shit.
He says, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, these may not be established catchphrases. Apparently, his catchphrase here is the word execute.
Yeah, I would have got that.
Do we have, is it second star on the right, straight on till morning? Is that?
That is not on there. Although it's quite nice that they use Peter Pan as the finale, the boy who never grew up, and these are men getting older. Next one. Remember your favorite captain of the USS Enterprise D, Edward Jellicoe, played by RoboCop baddie Ronnie Cox?
Get it done.
Yep, that's right. Now, number 10. When you think of one Starfleet order that elicited a standing ovation for no reason, yes, it was in Star Trek Generations when, surrounded by reporters, Kirk said,
Get that damn thing out of my face.
Take us out. Next up. No, this wasn't a Star Trek and Nike crossover. Picard said this one time. It's not a catchphrase. One time when he was really depressed. Weirdly, this comes from Generations too.
Just do it.
Yes, absolutely.
I remember when that is. He's still dressed up in the 18th century sailor outfit, and he's asking Riker to do something, and Riker's, Captain, shouldn't we just do it?
Next one. So Captain Lorca says this in Star Trek Discovery Season 1. It's number one word, that mostly indicated the ship was about to use the spore drive.
Oh.
It's the tip of my tongue. One word.
It's just one word.
Go.
Go, yes.
Really? That was a total guess.
Number 7. Remember when Star Trek ripped off Han and Lando? The first Star Trek reboot in 2009, that version of Captain Pike said, insert quote, twice. It's a clear Star Wars nod. And you know what? It worked.
Punch it?
Yeah, punch it, absolutely.
So he did. Yeah.
Now we're going to another modern show. This is Lower Decks. Captain Freeman tries out a phrase in the episode Envoys. Then later in the holographic simulation in Crisis Point, she says, another part of this one isn't bad, but considering Saru isn't really using the item we're talking about anymore, it's suddenly outdated. It's 2 different phrases in Lower Decks.
I've never actually watched Lower Decks, so
yeah,
leaving this to you, Alasdair.
I've binged season 1, but the show doesn't follow the captain. It follows Boimler and what's her face? I forget. It's the thing about it's like if Family Guy did a Star Trek show, so its canonicity, I think, is dubious to say the least.
Oh, this one is Warp Me, or it's Warp Time. Now, number 5. It's weird that Anson Mount's Captain Pike has only been around since 2019, and yet this catchphrase has already become a huge part of the Trek fandom, because Pike, Spock, and number 1 will all be in Strange New Worlds sometime either 2010 or 2022, so this tells us when this article was written. Expect to be hearing this phrase a lot more in the coming years. It's a 2-word one.
Considering how much I watch Strange New Worlds, I think I'd have known this one, but
this one,
I'm drawing a blank as well.
It's hit it.
Okay.
We had the beloved catchphrase of do it, which it does admit here is not really a catchphrase. Number 3 is let's fly. Number 2 is make it so. So number 1, While Picard certainly made this catchphrase his own in Star Trek The Next Generation, the first Star Trek captain who said it was Captain Pike in the pilot, The Cage. What is that?
I'm going to guess, is it engage?
Yes, absolutely. It's engage. That is the 12 best captain's catchphrases. Folks, it's been a pleasure having our rendezvous here. I'm delighted that we made it out of that black hole.
Me too.
And hopefully we will be finishing off the series in style soon. So signing off for this episode, it's the Horror Cult Films podcast team. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Cheerio.
Live long and prosper.